Hello everybody. Welcome to Creating the Basic Adaptable Game Engine Library, Part 11, Texture Class Design. In any video game, you'll have on-screen entities which we call sprites. And in the previous videos, we've talked about a vector class, which we can use to store the position of a sprite. We've talked about a rectangle class, which we can use to store the boundary of a sprite. In this video, we'll talk about the last of the three major classes that the sprite class needs. And this is called the texture class. Now, a texture is an image, but with some additional data as well. In this case, there might be some sprites which just consist of a single image. For example, a turtle. Right? So this will be the main character of the Starfish Collector game that you move around the screen. And in this case, just an image is all the data that the sprite class would need. But for future games, we might not want to use the entire image in our application. For example, let's consider an image such as this. In a later project, towards the very end of this series, we'll create a platformer game, in which case we'll have this character walking across the screen. And this is an example of a sprite sheet animation. A sprite sheet is an image which contains lots of sub-images, which are meant to be played one after the other in sequence to create the illusion of movement. So in this case, with this image, on the screen you'll only see a part of this image at any point in time. Right, so in this case, the texture class and the need for this class becomes apparent, because we have both the image file, but we also need the data as to which part of the image should be rendered to the screen at a point in time. As a different example of why we might want to use only part of an image, let's take a look at something like this. This is an example of an image called a tile map, which again, we'll spend a lot of time working with as we move on in the course. The way a tile map works is kind of like a sprite sheet. It's an image consisting of lots of sub-images. In this case, this is a 4x4 tile map, in which you'll repeat certain parts of this image to create some kind of a background level design. It's a very efficient way to use image data. But again, we'll never just display this entire image on the screen, we'll display regions within this image at any point in time. So the texture class is going to store two pieces of information for us. It will store an image file, but we'll also use the rectangle class that we created in the previous videos to specify what part of the image should be drawn at any point in time. That being said, we should go ahead and take a look at the Javadoc for this course, or for this class. All right, and here it is. So the texture class, again, it's going to be image data for drawing a sprite. And for technical reasons we'll talk about later, texture objects will create them using a static method called load. And for efficiency purposes, you might have different sprites which share a single texture. For example, in the Starfish Collector game, the turtle character will collect multiple starfish objects. There's no reason to keep loading many copies of the same starfish image into memory. We can just load it into a single texture, and then all the sprites will share that instance of the texture object. All right, so the constructor, it will be possible to create an empty texture, but in particular, we'll usually use this method, a method called load, which will take an image file name And then it will load an image from disk, and it will create a texture object. In addition, when this method is called, a default rectangle will be created, and that rectangle will store the original dimensions of the image. Later on, when we talk about things like sprite sheet animations and tile maps, we'll have convenience methods which can be used to change the rectangle that defines what part of the image will be drawn. But this is really all we're going to need for now. Within the class, we'll have an image object, and since we'll be using something called JavaFX to create windowed applications, we will learn about that pretty soon, we'll use their image class to store the image files. And again, we'll use a rectangle to define the rectangular region within the image that will be rendered. So we've got our constructor, we've got our load method, and that's about all we're going to need. So that's the design considerations behind the texture class. In the next video, we'll go ahead and code that up. Thanks for watching.